Hi guys, how are you doing? I'm going to talk a little bit today about cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. We just read about a essay called One World, One Culture, which has examples and stories of different types of culture influencing and changing another one, even if it's just the way that you work, for instance, or the types of things you do, the types of food that you eat, etc. So we'll think about today a little bit in what is the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, right? So that term, cultural appropriation, is not actually in our reading, but I think it's a word that you may come across. And this is a picture of Barbie, Day of the Dead Barbie. Barbie, the doll, right, that kids play with, is a very American, and we might almost call it iconic American. That is, it's something that's very much associated with America and American culture. The Barbie doll, the way that people wanted to be Barbie when they were kids. Some people, right, especially little girls, wanted to be Barbie, right, and that's a very American type of a thing, right? It's an invention of American culture. But here, Barbie has either appreciated or appropriated the Day of the Dead Mexican culture, right? So the question is, whether we should be offended by this Day of the Dead Barbie, or just laugh at it, or not care, or depends, right? So cultural appropriation is when you take culture from some other culture, right, and you make it your own. So cultural appropriation is a bad thing, right? It's usually considered a derogatory term. You wouldn't. It's not something you want to do. One wants to do, right? So cultural appropriation is usually something that involves a power imbalance. That is, we're taking culture from a group that is less has less money, has less power, has less influence than ours. So if you would say American culture is a very powerful culture around the world, right? We export our culture, Americans do, through uh, movies and music all the time. And so you'd say it's a very powerful kind of culture in globally. If somebody, an American artist, takes Native American, in this case, this is from an American football team called the Redskins, that you see here, this logo, takes something from a group like Native Americans, who are not powerful, who are a small group, whose culture is very important to them, and maybe they don't want other cultures to just take their stuff, or use an image of a Native American as part of an American football team, right? So that would be sort of considered stealing, right? You're taking something, it could be music, could be food, whatever, from a group that has less power, right? And in America, that's very commonly Native Americans were used and are still used. For instance, this is still used as the Washington Redskins American football team logo. In other cases, that's changed, and that's done less and less than it used to be. So, for instance, just now, this was last week. You may have seen this butter in the grocery store, Land O'Lakes. That's the term for Minnesota, right? There's so many lakes there. This is what the Land O'Lakes butter looks like now. It just changed last week, but you could probably still find in the grocery store Land O'Lakes butter that looks like this, with a Native American woman holding the butter, right? And dressed in kind of traditional garb. But they changed that because they're sensitive to cultural appropriation, right? That they didn't want to use Native Americans as advertisements for butter, right? It's in today's world, it's a little it's offensive, basically, right? So cultural appropriation is offensive, but it's kind of hard to tell sometimes what's cultural appropriation and what's cultural appreciation, all right? Because Does that mean that we should never borrow or take like good things from other cultures? Like most of American culture is taken from other cultures, right? Most of the food and the music and things are influenced and taken from other cultures, right? So we would have very boring food, I think, right? And very boring music if we didn't ever, uh, you know, take, or take might not be the right word, borrow from other cultures. Um, so cultural appreciation or a cultural exchange is a little different, right? And here's just some pictures. Like here's Elvis, and he kind of stole or took or borrowed a lot of African American music, and turned it into very popular music, right? And was often accused of cultural appropriation. Like those people who'd actually invented the music never saw all the money that Elvis saw. There's Madonna dressed up in Indian garb. And here's some people, it's not the best picture, but just some people on an exchange, right? And they're wearing traditional kimonos, but they're clearly not Japanese. Maybe they're students on an exchange, right? And we think that this sort of exchange and appreciation is probably a good thing, right? So today you'll look at a couple of things that have to do with appreciation and versus appropriation, right? And just have an opinion on like what uh, uh, form some kind of opinion on what's appropriate and not. It's very difficult, I think. I mean, I don't know the answer to the question. So one thing you'll do is look at this letter from a person living in Mexico who's an American, right? But this American living in Mexico speaks Spanish pretty well. Has lived there for a long time. He knows all about the culture. He's studied the history. He's married to a Mexican, right? And his problem is that he's sort of gets very frustrated or mad because his friend who is Mexican makes snide comments. In other words, puts him down, right? Snide is like you're being very, you think you're Mexican, huh? Like very kind of mean. His friend says mean things to him because he's actually Mexican. However, this actual Mexican person lives in Colorado, does not speak Spanish, right, and doesn't really know anything about Mexican culture or music or food, right? And so the letter writer is saying, "What's your opinion on this? Aren't I more Mexican than my friend who's has Mexican parents because I do all the things that Mexicans do, right?" This is the point here, right? He says his response, that is the Mexican living in America, uh, is always that I can't understand the real Mexican culture because I'm Anglo. It's in the blood, he'll say, right? However, that does seem like, right? He says the exact words racists use to say you can never be American, right? So that's a problem, and but it's a little more. I mean, I would say that in your response, you could have any response you want. Uh, I think it's a little more nuanced. Is the word? It's not as cut and dried. It's not as simple as the way he's talking about it there, right? It's probably somewhere in between, you know, being this way and that way about it, I think. Anyway, all right. But you just bring up your own whatever your thoughts are. So we're thinking about cultural mixing and multiculturalism and how cultures change because they're influenced by other cultures. Okay, so taking all of that information and these ideas, we're going to try and put it together into two paragraphs, and that you'll write for next time, and those I have here, right? So it's not the very best copy, but I'll show you anyway. All right. So what you'll do is sort of think through where it says critical thinking. I believe this is page 105 if you have the book. We just read this One World, One Culture, right? And you think about ways in which my culture, whatever that means to you, has been influenced by other cultures. So whatever that means to you in terms of my culture, your home culture, right? What kinds of influences have you had? So if you live in Mexico, for instance, you would maybe, you could look around and you see the Walmart and the Taco Bell or whatever, and you say, okay, these are sort of things that are influences on my culture, and maybe parts of music or movies or other things, right? Um, and then ways in which my culture has remained unique. That is, things that just don't change, right? Even though there's all of these other influences from other cultures. And those could be very deep things. If you remember, we talked about surface culture and deep culture, right? We talked about things that you can see with your eyes, right? And music and like music and dress and food and stuff. And then things that are a little more deep or symbolic culture, we call it, that is the way that the family works, the way that people live together, the way that people, fall in love or whatever. Can be things that, even though the food may have changed, other stuff has remained unique. Or there could be things that are more surface culture that are unique and that people don't have not taken to to other places, right? Um, and this is where anyway. And if you have specific examples, I hope we'll share them together, because it's always quite interesting. People have things that are unique to their culture which we've never heard of. I'm sure that everybody has some of those. So what you're going to do is choose one aspect of your culture from the chart above. So you think ways in which my culture has been influenced, ways in which it's remained unique, the same. And then you think about if that's changed, right? Find answers to the following questions. How has this specific aspect of your culture changed over the last generation? What has caused these changes? So you write 2 paragraphs. In the first paragraph, you describe a traditional aspect of your culture. And in the second, you use an example to explain how your culture is changing. Last time I did this, I got a very nice essay about the ofrenda, which everybody knows because we've all seen Coco, right? And I think it was very interesting because it has not changed, right? And it's also something that really, even though we borrow for Day of the Dead the masks and some of the food and other things. And in fact, actually, my son in first grade made an ofrenda last year, like a little one, but it's not the same thing, right? It's so much not the same thing, right? It doesn't have the meaning that it has in Mexican culture. So that was an interesting example. Like, so she chose the ofrenda and say, this is something that has been influenced by other culture. Maybe the things that you put into the ofrenda are different now, but it's at the same time. So it's changed a little bit. It's changed from 50 years ago. The kinds of things you would do to decorate an ofrenda. Now, I'm sorry if I'm not saying it right, and also if you don't know what that is, it's like a thing in the Day of the Dead, like a watch Coco and you'll find out. How about that? He put pictures, and anyway, it was a very good essay because what the point of her essay was that the actual meaning of it is unique, right? So even though, like, for instance, I might, my son might make an ofrenda in school, it does not have the same meaning, right? It's just a kind of thing, right? It doesn't. And anyway, it's very moving the way that she wrote about it. So that was a good one. But whatever, it could be music, it could be anything, something that you think, way that it's changed. So in the first paragraph, you describe a traditional aspect of your culture, and then the second, somehow that it's changing, right? Could be anything. If you're stuck for ideas, just I don't know, talk to each other, talk to me, and figure what. I'm sure that in your lives you could see that things have changed, things that your grandparents did that you don't do anymore, right? That kind of thing, right? Um, and that's the for the next time, and I think that's we've done. Oh, and then the other thing you're going to do is just watch this short video, which gives you another way of thinking about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. And I think if you watch this video, it's about Japanese people who are very interested in Chicano culture and have taken a lot of the things that Chicanos are generally what we call it, sort of Western Californian Mexican Americans, been there for hundreds of years. And anyway, so they've borrowed a lot from that culture, and you can decide also whether you think it's appropriation or appreciation. There's some questions here on this, so do that, and I will meet with you and we'll talk about this next time. Great, thanks, and talk to you later.